It was supposed to be a routine demolition. The old Whitmore Psychiatric Hospital had been abandoned for decades, its windows boarded, its hallways rotting, its name fading under layers of rust and ivy. But when the demolition crew arrived that morning in late autumn, something stopped them. Inside the administration wing, behind a warped metal filing cabinet, one of the workers found a stack of sealed envelopes. Each was yellowed by time, stamped with postmarks that stopped abruptly in 1983, the same year the hospital closed. The most disturbing part wasn't the age of the letters. It was the fact that the most recent one had been delivered just 3 days earlier. The letters were all addressed to the same person. A patient named Clara Hayes, admitted in 1976 for reasons that had been scrubbed from public record. Her room had been sealed shut since the evacuation, yet the letters kept coming, one by one, always bearing the same neat handwriting. No return address, no fingerprints. Only a red wax seal in the shape of a crescent moon. When the lead contractor picked up the latest envelope, a faint scent of lilac drifted through the air, impossibly fresh, as if it had just been written. By that evening, the demolition was postponed. A local historian, Dr. Alan Mercer, was called to document the site. He had spent years studying institutions like Whitmore, fascinated by their decline and the lives that had vanished behind locked doors. He expected to find old records, broken equipment, maybe a few forgotten belongings. What he didn't expect was to find a voice calling out from the past, one that refused to be silenced. As Mercer read the first letter aloud in the flickering light of his lantern, something about the words felt wrong. The ink was too dark, too wet, as though it hadn't yet dried. And in the corner of the page, faint but visible, was a single fresh fingerprint. Not his, not old. Someone or something had touched it recently. The letter began with a line that would haunt him for the rest of his life. I know you still walk these halls, even if they no longer exist. From that moment, the hospital was no longer just an artifact of the past. It was a wound still open, still bleeding, still whispering through the paper of those impossible letters. And what Dr. Mercer uncovered next would blur the line between sanity, guilt, and the echoes of those who were never truly freed from Whitmore's walls. He had no idea that by opening the letters, he had also opened the door that was never meant to be unlocked. The door was never meant to be opened. The Whitmore Psychiatric Hospital stood at the edge of Pine Hollow, a forgotten town that even the maps had given up on. The building loomed against the gray horizon like a skeleton of brick and steel, its windows black, its frame consumed by the forest that had crept back to reclaim it. Dr. Alan Mercer parked his old station, wagon by the cracked front gate, the crunch of gravel under his tires echoing into the silence. His breath misted in the cold air. He could smell damp wood, rust, and something faintly sweet like lilac. He thought it was his imagination until he realized it was drifting from somewhere deep inside the building. He was alone. At least he believed he was. The demolition crew had refused to stay after sundown, claiming the air inside made them feel dizzy. They said they heard voices through the vents and the sound of someone walking just out of sight. Mercer had dismissed it as nerves. Old buildings made noise as pipes expanding, wind in the rafters, small animals nesting in walls. Still, when he pushed open the main door and heard the long groan of metal, it felt like a warning. The entrance hall stretched out before him, lined with peeling murals of smiling nurses and empty wheelchairs overturned on their sides. The smell of mildew and dust filled his lungs. Every step he took sent clouds of dirt spiraling into the beam of his flashlight. He had explored dozens of hospitals, but Whitmore was different. It didn't feel empty. It felt paused, as though everything inside was waiting for someone to return. He followed the corridor toward the administration wing, where the letters had been found. His boots crunched over glass and scraps of paper. The old clock above the nurse's station was still ticking faintly, though there was no power in the building. Mercer froze. The ticking was uneven, stuttering like a heartbeat, trying to remember its rhythm. When he stepped closer, the sound stopped. He found the filing cabinet the workers had mentioned, toppled against the wall. Behind it was a wooden door that didn't appear on any of the blueprints he'd reviewed. The paint had bubbled and cracked, but the handle gleamed as if it had been polished recently. For a long moment, Mercer stood still, feeling an inexplicable resistance in his chest. He shouldn't open it. Every instinct told him so. Yet curiosity, the same force that had driven his entire career, pushed his hand forward. The door groaned as it gave way. Beyond it was a small corridor lined with patient records, all perfectly preserved in neat stacks. The air was dry, untouched by time. On the floor lay a single envelope, identical to the others. Yellowed paper, red wax seal shaped like a crescent moon. He knelt down, feeling his pulse quicken. The letter had no dust on it. Someone had placed it there recently. He hesitated, but his hand was already breaking the seal. Inside was a note written in elegant cursive. The words shimmered faintly under his flashlight. "Dr. Mercer, thank you for coming. I've been waiting for someone to listen. The others wouldn't. They said I was confused, that I was gone. But I'm still here. I never left. Please, before they tear this place apart, find room 313. The truth is inside." The signature was unmistakable. Clara Hayes. His heart sank. Clara's name was known only to him and a few archivists who had reviewed the sealed patient list. The hospital's records had been destroyed in 1983 after a mysterious fire. There was no way anyone could have known her name unless they had been inside those files, or unless Clara herself had written it. But she couldn't have. She had been declared dead 40 years ago. Mercer's flashlight flickered. He turned it upward, catching sight of something etched into the ceiling above him. At first, he thought it was cracks in the plaster, but when he stepped back, he saw the pattern clearly, the same crescent moon that appeared on the seals. He felt a chill spread through his body. Somewhere deeper in the hospital, a door slammed. The sound reverberated down the hallway, sharp and final. He called out, his voice echoing off the walls, but there was no answer. Just the creak of the old building settling or shifting. He pocketed the letter and made his way down the corridor, following the faded numbers painted on each door. 308, 309, 310. The numbers climbed, and the smell of lilac grew stronger. When he reached 313, he stopped. The door looked untouched, the handle gleaming like the one before. But it wasn't locked. He pushed it open and stepped inside. The room was small, its walls still lined with patient drawings. A rusted bed frame sat against the far wall. Beside it was a nightstand, and on it another letter. This one was unsealed, its pages fluttering slightly, though there was no wind. Mercer picked it up and read the first line. "I told them the walls were listening. They didn't believe me. But I think they believe now." The temperature dropped sharply. His breath fogged. Then, from the corner of the room, came a faint scraping sound metal against stone, slow and deliberate. He turned the flashlight, and for a moment, he thought he saw movement. The silhouette of a woman standing behind the bed, her head tilted, her eyes reflecting light that shouldn't have been there. The beam trembled in his hand. The figure didn't move closer, but the sound continued, as though something was being dragged across the floor, just out of sight. He blinked, and she was gone. Mercer backed out of the room, his heart pounding, the letter still in his hand. He didn't realize until he reached the main hall that his fingertips were stained black with ink. Not dry ink, wet. He looked down the corridor toward the entrance. The door he had come through was now closed, and from behind it, he heard the slow, rhythmic ticking again, like the clock that refused to stop. Whatever was happening inside Whitmore wasn't over. It had just begun. The letters were addressed to the dead. By morning, the sky over Pine Hollow had turned the color of old paper, pale and suffocating. Dr. Mercer sat in his car outside the hospital gates, staring at the envelope on the passenger seat. It looked harmless now, just a piece of yellowed paper, but every time his eyes met that red wax seal, his skin prickled. He'd barely slept. The memory of the woman's reflection in room 313 replayed in his mind like a loop that refused to end. He tried convincing himself it had been a trick of the light, a shadow, a hallucination brought on by exhaustion. But deep down, he knew better. He turned on the recorder, clipped to his jacket, and spoke softly. Field Notes, Whitmore Hospital, Day 1. Found multiple letters addressed to a deceased patient, Clara Hayes. One was sealed recently. Possible hoax, but handwriting consistent with 1970s samples. His voice trembled slightly. He stopped recording. The word hoax didn't feel right. Hoaxes didn't leave fingerprints. Hoaxes didn't make the air drop to freezing or make ink bleed as if the words were alive. At 9 a.m., he met with the town's postal clerk, an old man named Harold Finch, who'd worked at Pine Hollow Post Office for nearly 50 years. Finch had pale eyes, a face lined with suspicion, and a tremor in his hands that made every letter he touched shake slightly. Mercer laid the most recent envelope on the counter. "Do you recognize this handwriting?" Finch squinted at it for a long time. "I've seen this before," he muttered. "Plenty of times." He pointed to the postmark dated just 4 days ago. It came through the night shift. No sender. Always the same smell of lilac. "I told them years ago to stop delivering them, but they just keep appearing in the bin." "Appearing?" Mercer asked. Finch nodded. "No one drops them off. No car, no person. They're just there in the morning. Always one. Always addressed to Miss Clara Hayes, Whitmore Hospital. But Whitmore's been closed since 1983, Mercer said. Finch gave him a long, uneasy look. "Yeah, that's the problem." Back in his motel room, Mercer spread out the letters on the table. He had 6 in total, now 5 found at the hospital, and the one Finch reluctantly handed over. He laid them side by side in order of their postmarks. Each letter had been sent on the same day of the month October 12th every year, without exception. But what made his stomach twist was the content. The first letter began with a plea for help, Clara describing voices in the vents, nurses whispering at night, and something beneath the hospital that moved only when the lights went out. The next letters became less coherent, her handwriting fraying, her words trembling into fear. The final one, postmarked this year, was written in perfect script again. It read, "I've been forgiven." But he hasn't. The walls won't let him leave. "Don't look for the body, Alan. Look for the voice." He stared at his own name on the page. His throat tightened. It was impossible. He'd only arrived yesterday. No one in Pine Hollow knew he was coming except the demolition supervisor. The letter couldn't have been written in advance, unless someone or something had been expecting him. He picked up the motel phone and called the county archives. A young woman answered. "I need patient admission records for Whitmore Hospital between 1970 and 1983, he said. There was a pause. "That file's restricted," she replied. "You'd need court authorization." He hesitated. "What about the names of the attending physicians? Anyone connected to a patient named Clara Hayes?" Another pause. He could hear her typing. Then quietly she said, "That name's sealed, but there's a note attached to the record. It says, 'Do not disclose.' Case still open." "Open?" He repeated. "She's been dead for 40 years. The woman's tone changed, uneasy. "Sir, I don't think you should be asking about her. The last person who did, their file was deleted. I have to go." The line went dead. Mercer sat in silence, the dial tone humming in his ear. Outside, wind pressed against the window, carrying the faint scent of lilac again. He turned his head sharply, but there were no flowers nearby, no perfume, nothing that could explain it. That night, he returned to the hospital. He told himself it was for documentation, but in truth, he was being pulled back drawn by something he didn't understand. The front door was ajar, swaying slightly, though there was no breeze. As he stepped inside, his flashlight flickered again. The air was colder than before, heavy with moisture. He moved through the corridors until he reached the records room. Something had changed. The stacks of patient files he'd seen the day before were now scattered across the floor, pages torn and shredded, as if a violent wind had passed through. The only folder left intact was labeled Hayes, CLAR Room 313. Inside were photographs. A young woman with pale skin, dark hair, and eyes that seemed to follow the camera. But behind her, barely visible in the corner of each photo, stood a shadowed figure wearing a long coat, its face obscured. In the final picture, only the coat remained hanging from a hook beside her bed. Mercer turned the last photo over. On the back, written in that same elegant script, was a single line. "He watches me write." He froze. The beam of his flashlight swept across the wall, illuminating a pattern of scratches. They formed letters, dozens of them, spelling out fragments of sentences that repeated endlessly. "He won't leave. He won't leave. He won't leave." Then came a sound he hadn't heard since childhood, the faint thud of mail hitting the floor. He turned toward the hallway. At the end of it, lying in a pool of moonlight, was another envelope, still warm, its wax seal gleaming fresh red. He approached slowly, heart pounding. The letter bore no name this time. Only 3 words, written in black ink across the front. For the doctor. He reached for it with a trembling hand, but before his fingers touched it, a woman's voice whispered softly behind him, so close it felt like breath on his neck. "Don't read that one." He spun around, but no one was there. Only the faint scent of lilac drifting down the corridor and the sound of footsteps retreating toward room 313. Room 313 was not empty. The following morning, the demolition of Whitmore was officially delayed for environmental assessment. Dr. Mercer knew that was a lie. The crew refused to go back inside after one of the workers claimed to hear someone crying in the east wing long after everyone had left. Mercer didn't argue. He wanted the building to himself. He needed to understand what was happening before anyone else interfered. He arrived just after dusk, armed with his recorder, flashlight, and a Polaroid camera. The air inside felt heavier than before, stale, but charged, like the pause before a thunderstorm. Every sound was sharper. His own footsteps echoed too loudly. The hospital seemed to breathe. The walls groaned. The pipes whispered. He wasn't sure if he was hearing things or if the building itself was remembering. He made his way directly to room 313. The door, which he distinctly remembered closing behind him the night before, now stood wide open. Inside, the light from the hallway spilled across the floor, illuminating a trail of dark stains that led to the bed. The sheets were torn, and on the wall above the headboard, new writing had appeared, thick, uneven strokes of black ink that hadn't been there before. It read, "You opened the wrong door." He stepped closer, his pulse pounding. The ink was still wet. He raised his recorder and whispered, "Room 313, third night." Unexplained writing on the wall appears recent. "Smells like," he stopped. The scent of lilac filled the air again, stronger this time, almost choking. He turned toward the corner of the room where he had seen the silhouette before. Nothing, just peeling wallpaper and shadows. Still, the temperature dropped another few degrees. His breath fogged. On the knitstand sat another letter. No seal this time, just folded neatly, as if placed there moments ago. His hands shook as he opened it. They said he was my doctor, but he wasn't. He came after the lights went out. He said he could fix me if I stayed quiet. When I stopped talking, he stopped coming. But I still hear him. He's still here. The others can't see him. Only me. Mercer swallowed hard. The note was dated October 11th, 1983, the day before the hospital was shut down. He flipped the paper over. On the back was a drawing of the same crescent moon symbol, but now it was broken in half, jagged lines splitting through the middle. A sudden metallic clang echoed from the hallway. He jerked his head toward the sound. The door to room 312 had slammed shut. He stepped out into the corridor, his flashlight flickering. "Hello?" he called. No response. He moved closer. The door to 312 was slightly ajar now, creaking back and forth. He nudged it open. The room was darker than the others. His beam swept across overturned furniture, scattered syringes, and a single rusted wheelchair. On the far wall hung an old patient chart. The name was smudged, but he could make out one word written in faint ink: Clara. Beneath it, the diagnosis field read only: auditory delusions, recurring episodes. Doctor involved. Mercer frowned. Doctor involved? That wasn't standard notation. He pulled the chart down to inspect it, but as he turned it over, a Polaroid photo slipped out from behind the page. It showed Clara sitting on her bed, her face pale, her eyes wide with something between fear and defiance. Standing beside her was a tall man in a white coat, but his face had been scratched out with thick black ink. In the reflection of the mirror behind them, however, the face was visible, and it wasn't human. The features were distorted, stretched, like something caught halfway between a smile and a scream. His hands trembled so badly, he dropped the photo. It landed face down, and on the back, written hastily, was another message. "He's behind you." He froze. His flashlight flickered once, then twice, before going dark. For a few seconds, the silence was absolute. Then came the sound-slow, deliberate breathing directly behind him. Mercer turned, swinging the light back on, but there was nothing there. Only the faint movement of the curtain by the window, though it was nailed shut. He took a step back, trying to calm himself, but the room seemed smaller now, the air thicker. The scent of lilac was suffocating. He stumbled out into the hallway, his breathing ragged. His flashlight beam caught something new on the opposite wall handprints smeared in black ink, leading toward the stairwell that descended into the basement. They were small, delicate, like a woman's, but the last few prints grew larger, warped, inhuman. He followed them down despite every instinct screaming at him to turn back. The basement smelled of rot and stagnant water. Old medical equipment lay scattered in the dark. He moved carefully, his shoes scraping against concrete. At the far end of the corridor, he found a heavy metal door chained shut. The words "Authorized Personnel Only" were stenciled above it. The handprints stopped here, clustered thickly around the handle. He lifted his flashlight and saw something glinting on the floor. It was a small brass nameplate, corroded with age. He wiped off the grime and read the engraving: Dr. Henry Rourke, Chief Psychiatrist. Mercer's stomach dropped. The name was familiar. He'd read about Rourke in a newspaper archive years ago. The man had disappeared the same week Whitmore was evacuated. No body was ever found. Theories ranged from suicide to flight, but none explained the evidence that he'd been inside the hospital the night it burned. He shone the light higher. Someone had carved letters into the door just above the handle. He never left. Mercer backed away slowly, the beam trembling in his hand. Then, from behind the door, came a faint sound, 3 deliberate knocks. He froze. Another 3 followed, louder this time. The metal shuddered, chains rattling. The smell of lilac was replaced by something metallic, sharp like blood. He turned and ran up the stairs, heart hammering, the sound of the knocking growing faster, angrier. When he reached the main hall, the ticking clock had started again. But this time, there was another sound with its soft footsteps pacing just behind him, matching his every move. He turned the recorder on again, whispering through shaking breaths. It's not just the letters. There's something here. Someone who never left. I think Dr. Rourke. He stopped mid-sentence. From the far end of the hall, he heard a woman's voice, clear and calm, calling his name. Alan. He turned, flashlight trembling, and saw the faint outline of a figure standing in the doorway of room 313. The doctor's voice never stopped. Dr. Mercer's. Flashlight wavered, its beam shaking as it illuminated the narrow figure standing in the doorway of room 313. She didn't move, but he could see the shimmer of her hair, the pale shape of her face barely visible in the darkness. His throat went dry. Clara? The name slipped out before he could stop himself. The figure tilted her head slowly, like an echo learning how to mimic. Then, without a sound, she stepped backward into the room, fading into the dark. Every rational thought screamed for him to leave. But curiosity, that same reckless instinct that had brought him here, pulled him forward. He stepped through the threshold, every creak of the floorboards amplifying his heartbeat. The room looked different again. The walls were damp, breathing almost, the wallpaper curling away like peeling skin. The words he had seen before, "You opened the wrong door," had been washed away, replaced by a new sentence scrawled in dripping black ink. He speaks when the lights go out. The flashlight flickered once and twice before plunging the room into absolute darkness. The silence that followed was suffocating. Then came the whisper, so faint it barely touched his ears. "Dr. Rourke." Mercer froze. The voice didn't sound like Clara's. It was lower, rasping, male. It seemed to come from the walls themselves. He raised the flashlight again, but it refused to turn on. The air grew colder. Then he heard it again, closer this time, right behind him. "Do you hear them too?" He spun around, slamming into the nightstand. His fingers found the Polaroid camera hanging around his neck. Without thinking, he pressed the shutter. The flash exploded, white light filling the room for an instant. And in that instant, he saw it. A tall figure in a white coat standing directly behind him, face shrouded in shadow, hands resting on Clara's rusted bed frame. The flash faded, and the room was empty again. His breathing turned ragged. He backed toward the doorway, fumbling for his recorder. "Field note," he whispered, voice trembling. Unexplained auditory phenomena, possible visual hallucination. Male voice identified as Rourke. "Cannot confirm." He stopped. His own voice began to echo unnaturally through the recorder, repeating his words with a delay of just 1 second. But then the echo kept going, repeating sentences he hadn't said. "He's still here. He's still here." The recorder crackled, then hissed with static. Mercer dropped it, the sound of his own distorted voice filling the hallway. When he bent to pick it up, a new voice emerged through the static, a woman's voice, soft and pleading. "He never let me leave." Mercer's stomach twisted. "Clara?" the voice replied faintly, almost buried in static. "Don't trust him. Don't trust anyone who calls themselves doctor." The recorder went dead. He ran a shaking hand through his hair, forcing himself to breathe. He needed to think. If this was real, then Dr. Henry Rourke had somehow continued his work long after Whitmore's closure. If it wasn't, if this was some manifestation of Clara's delusions, then the hospital itself had absorbed them, preserved them like a parasite feeding on memory. He moved toward the hallway, determined to leave, but something made him stop. At the end of the corridor, light was spilling from a door that hadn't been opened before. The old therapy room. The glow wasn't from electricity. It pulsed like candlelight, warm and unsteady. He stepped inside. The room had been preserved as if waiting for a session to begin. 2 chairs faced each other, one overturned, the other upright. A reel-to-reel tape recorder sat on the desk between them, its spools spinning slowly, though the machine was unplugged. Mercer approached it cautiously. A label on the tape read, Session 47, Patient, C. Hayes, Dr. H. Rourke. He pressed play. At first, there was only static. Then Clara's voice came through, trembling but clear. You said you could help me. Why does it hurt when I close my eyes? A man's voice answered, low and deliberate. Pain means you're improving, Clara. The mind resists change. I hear them at night, she whispered. In the vents, they whisper your name. Silence. Then the sound of movement, the chair scraping the floor. The man's tone shifted, calm but cold. There are no voices in the vents. Only the ones you bring with you. Mercer's pulse pounded in his ears. The tape crackled, and Clara began crying softly. The man whispered something inaudible, then the crying stopped. The tape clicked to an end. Mercer stared at the machine, frozen. The spools began to turn again on their own. The same conversation replayed, but this time the voices were reversed, distorted. Clara's sobs became low growls, and Rourke's calm tone warped into something almost mechanical, as if another presence was speaking through him. The final line emerged in a guttural whisper. I can fix you too, Doctor. The room's light went out. Mercer stumbled back, hitting the wall. The recorder on the desk burst into motion again, spitting out tape like intestines spilling from a wound. Words appeared on the mirrored wall in front of him, written backward but unmistakable. Join the session. He turned to flee, but the doorway had vanished. Only the smooth wall remained. Behind him, he heard the scrape of a chair being dragged slowly across the floor. The scent of lilac returned, now mixed with something acidic. Then came another sound of faint hum, like breathing, followed by the click of a pen. Someone was writing. The letters formed slowly across the glass, in front of his reflection. Welcome, Dr. Mercer. His own reflection blinked, but he didn't. The mirror shattered. When the shards settled, the room was empty. The tape recorder lay still, but a new envelope had been placed on top of it, the wax seal still wet. His name was written across the front in perfect, elegant script. For the next session, he didn't open it. Not yet. He knew whatever was inside wasn't finished speaking. As he stepped back into the dark hallway, the clock in the main hall began ticking again, but this time it wasn't keeping time. It was counting down. The countdown reached 0. Dr. Mercer emerged from the therapy room, drenched in sweat, his hands trembling so violently he could barely hold the flashlight. The ticking echoed through every corridor now, growing faster, sharper, more deliberate, like a pulse running through the veins of the hospital itself. He looked at his watch. The second hand was spinning backward. The numbers blurred, twisting between hours that no longer existed. He forced himself to focus. The envelope in his pocket felt heavier than it should have, the wax still warm, almost breathing. Every instinct told him to throw it away, but something deep within him whispered otherwise. Knowledge, that was always the price, and he had spent his entire life chasing it. He reached the main lobby, where moonlight streamed through the cracked windows. Dust swirled in the air like ash. The massive clock above the reception desk was still ticking in reverse. 11:47, 11:32, 11:14. He counted each shift with a growing sense of dread. The air vibrated faintly with each tick, as if the entire structure was moving toward something inevitable. He set his recorder on the counter and spoke through ragged breaths. Time irregularities observed. Mechanical clock running backward, possibly interference or magnetic disturbance. Scent of lilac intensifying. Subjective temperature drop confirmed. Possible auditory hallucinations continue. He paused, staring at his reflection in the dark glass of the window. For a moment, it didn't move with him. He blinked hard, heart pounding. No, I'm not losing it. He pulled the envelope from his coat. The seal glistened under the moonlight, and before he even broke it, a faint sound seeped from within, a soft, rhythmic tapping like fingernails against wood. He hesitated, then tore the wax open. Inside was a single sheet of thick paper, the edges burned. The handwriting was Clara's, delicate and controlled. The clock stops when he returns. The walls remember every scream. You can't fix what was never sick, Doctor. You can only trade places. His vision swam. The smell of lilac grew suffocating. Then, behind him, he heard that same tapping sound again, this time louder, echoing from the hallway that led to the basement. 3 knocks. A pause, then 3 more. He turned toward the sound, every nerve screaming. The knocking stopped, replaced by a dragging noise, like chains being pulled across concrete. Mercer steadied himself and began walking, one slow step at a time. The light trembled on the walls, illuminating faded photographs of patients smiling in group therapy sessions. Their eyes had all been scratched out. As he descended the stairs, the air grew colder. The smell of mold mixed with something metallic, something alive. At the bottom, the metal door marked authorized personnel only stood slightly open now, its chains hanging broken. The engraving above the handle, he never left, was smeared, as if someone had tried to erase it with their bare hands. Mercer raised the flashlight and peered inside. The basement beyond was no longer empty. A faint light pulsed in the distance, red and rhythmic, like the glow of a heartbeat buried underground. He stepped through. The floor was slick. Something dripped steadily from the ceiling. His shoes left prints that shimmered faintly in the dark. He reached the source of the light, a medical gurney standing beneath a single bulb swinging overhead. Strapped to it was a shape covered in a decaying white sheet. His hands shook as he lifted the edge of the fabric. Beneath it lay the remains of a man in a doctor's coat, flesh mummified by time, a rusted name tag still pinned to his chest. Dr. Henry Rourke. But that wasn't what made Mercer stagger backward. The corpse's right hand was clutching an envelope fresh, clean, the same red wax seal glistening on its surface. Mercer pried it free and stared at the front. It wasn't addressed to Clara. It was addressed to Dr. Alan Mercer. His flashlight flickered. He tore the letter open, hands trembling. "You've taken my place. The hospital needs a doctor. You opened the wrong door, and now it will never close. The patients still need their sessions. Don't keep them waiting." His pulse thundered in his ears. The clock above him, the one that had been counting backward, struck 0. The bulb overhead went out. For a moment, the darkness was absolute. Then, one by one, lights flickered on throughout the corridor. Voices began to whisper through the intercom system, overlapping, rising. "Dr. Rourke? Session ready, Doctor. Doctor, the patient is waiting." Mercer backed away, but the voices surrounded him now, echoing from every direction. He turned toward the exit, but the door was gone. The entire basement had shifted, the walls pulsing faintly as if alive. He ran down a narrow corridor that hadn't been there before, guided by the flicker of dying lights. His own voice whispered from the intercom, distorted and hollow. "You can't leave." Not yet. He stumbled into a small chamber, a mirror image of the therapy room upstairs. 2 chairs, a desk, a tape recorder. And sitting in the opposite chair was a woman with dark hair and pale skin, Clara. Her eyes were open, but they didn't look at him. She was staring through him, her lips moving silently. "Clara," he breathed, stepping closer. "It's over. You don't have to stay here." Her lips curved into something that wasn't a smile. Her voice, when it came, was soft but filled with sorrow. "You don't understand. It never ends. The doctor always comes back. Before he could speak, the recorder on the desk clicked on. His own voice played from it. Session 58. Patient stable. Doctor replaced. The bulb above them began to pulse again, faster, syncing with the ticking that had returned. 10:59. 11 o'clock. 11:01. The clock was counting forward now. Clara stood, reaching out to touch his arm. Her hand was cold as stone. "You hear it, don't you?" "The ticking?" he whispered. She shook her head slowly. "No, the heart." The sound deepened, vibrating through the walls, the floor, his chest. The building itself seemed to be breathing again. Then she leaned in, her voice barely a whisper. "He's awake." The room's lights went out. A voice, deep and calm, echoed from the darkness, the same one from the old tapes. "Good evening, Dr. Mercer. Let's begin." The hospital chose its new doctor. Dr. Mercer couldn't see a thing. The light was gone, replaced by a low, throbbing hum that seemed to rise from beneath the floor. His flashlight sputtered weakly before dying completely. The darkness wasn't empty. It had depth, movement, a presence that pressed against him from all sides. He tried to speak, to demand an answer, but his throat locked. The air tasted metallic, wet, alive. Then the voice came again, smooth and patient, as if it had been rehearsing for years. "Breathe, doctor." "You're safe here," Mercer froze. It wasn't coming from a speaker this time. It was inside his head, sliding between his thoughts like a hand through water. He felt something cold brush his shoulder. When he turned, a faint light flickered behind him. The therapy room was visible again, its walls pristine, the air clean and white like a memory scrubbed of all its stains. The smell of lilac was faint now, almost pleasant. In the chair opposite him sat Dr. Henry Rourke. Not the corpse he'd seen in the basement, but a living man, young, composed, his lab coat immaculate. His eyes, however, were empty pools of gray. He smiled, folding his hands neatly on the desk between them. "I've been waiting for you, Alan," he said softly. "I knew they'd send someone curious enough to look." Mercer stumbled backward. "You're dead." "I saw you." Rourke tilted his head. "Death is such a narrow definition. In this place, we don't die. We adapt. The hospital keeps what it needs." He gestured to the room around them. The walls pulsed faintly, veins of shadow moving beneath the paint. "It's alive, doctor. Always has been." Every scream, every treatment, every patient, it absorbed them. That's what Whitmore was built for. A perfect organism that feeds on care, on therapy, on suffering disguised as healing. Mercer shook his head. "You tortured them." "I tried to fix them," Rourke said. His smile widened. "But when you open too many doors, the walls start listening. They learned from me. They needed a new physician when I earned." He stood slowly, his movement precise, deliberate. "You opened the door, Alan. That makes you the successor. You felt it, didn't you? The way the air bends to your voice now. The way the halls shift when you walk. It's already begun." Mercer's heart pounded. "I'm not part of this." Rourke's tone remained calm. "You already are. Every question you asked, every note you took, it listens. It learns. You brought it back to life." The room began to tremble. The clock on the wall struck 12, each chime echoing through his skull like a heartbeat. The floor rippled, tiles warping as if something beneath them was moving. Mercer's hands began to shake violently. The recorder on the desk turned on by itself, his own voice whispering from it. "Session 1. Doctor unstable. Subject resistant to treatment." He looked down. The white coat he'd been wearing was no longer his own. It bore a stitched tag that read H. Rourke. His name was gone. His voice caught in his throat. "No." Rourke circled him slowly, the air growing thick and cold. "You can leave, if you wish." but someone has to stay. The letters will keep coming. The sessions will continue. The hospital needs its doctor. Mercer staggered toward the door, desperate to escape. When he yanked it open, it didn't lead to the hallway. Instead, he found himself staring into room 313. The bed was clean now, neatly made. A vase of lilacs sat on the nightstand beside a fresh envelope. He stepped closer, trembling, unable to resist. The envelope was addressed in perfect cursive to the next doctor. Behind him, Rourke's voice whispered gently, "Sign your name, and it's yours." Mercer turned, but the room was empty. Only his own reflection stared back at him from the window, except it wasn't his reflection anymore. It was Rourke's face smiling faintly, his lips moving in perfect sync with Mercer's thoughts. He screamed, grabbing the letter and tearing it apart. The moment he did, the lights in the hospital burst one by one, shattering in waves of glass and electricity. The building groaned like a living thing being wounded. The walls began to bleed black ink, the same that had stained Clara's letters. Through the chaos, he heard her voice calling from somewhere distant, soft but urgent. "Alan, it's too late. You can't stop it now. You only wake it up." He stumbled down the hallway, papers swirling around him, the sound of rushing wind filling every corridor. The hospital was collapsing inward, devouring itself. He burst through the front doors into the night, gasping for air. Behind him, Whitmore stood silent again, its windows dark, its gates swinging in the cold wind. He looked down at his hands. The ink was gone. The coat was gone. His own reflection stared back at him in the cracked glass of the entrance door. For the first time in hours, everything was still. He laughed, shaky and half-crazed, convinced it was finally over. Then he noticed the letter on the passenger seat of his car. It hadn't been there before. The wax seal was fresh, red, still soft to the touch. He opened it with trembling fingers. The paper inside was blank, except for a single line written in wet black ink. "Welcome home, Dr. Rourke." The ink spread across the page like veins, crawling over his skin as the smell of lilac filled the car. The clock on the dashboard began to tick backward again. Outside, the hospital lights flickered once, then all at once. Every window glowed faintly red. And deep inside, in room 313, a new voice began its first session.